Your seat must be a mistake." The flight attendant's tone dripped with disbelief as Zoe Washington held out her boarding pass, seat 2A first class. Every eye turned, some curious, some condescending. At 17, she had built what even seasoned engineers couldn't, a revolutionary aircraft design that earned her this flight, this moment. But to the people before her, she was an error in the system, an intruder in luxury. What they didn't know was that the man quietly seated in 1A, the airline's CEO and founder of the scholarship that brought her here, was watching everything. And by landing their world of quiet prejudice, would implode. The air in the first-class cabin of Apex Air Flight 715 from Atlanta to Los Angeles had a specific scent, a mixture of expensive leather hot towels and an unspoken sense of exclusivity. It was an atmosphere designed to insulate its occupants from the world below. For Zoe Washington, 17, and clutching a backpack that contained more advanced aeronautical schematics than most graduate students produce in a lifetime. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a courtroom where she was already judged. Her journey to seat 2A began not on the plush navy carpet of the aisle, but months earlier, hunched over a computer modeling fluid dynamics for a new type of composite winglet. She had designed a prototype that theoretically reduced drag by an additional 4%, a monumental leap in fuel efficiency. This design won her the inaugural Isabel Sterling Memorial Scholarship for Young Innovators, a prize that came with a generous educational grant and an all-expenses-paid trip to Los Angeles to accept the award at the Aero Innovate Dynamic Symposium. The first-class ticket was not an indulgence. It was part of the prize, a standard for all of the Foundation's honored guests. Zoe knew this. The Foundation knew this. The airline's booking system knew this. The only person who seemed to harbor a deep, unshakable doubt was Brenda, the senior flight attendant, guarding the entrance to the cabin like a dragon at the gate of a treasure hoard. Brenda had a face that seemed permanently pinched, as if she'd just tasted something sour. Her blonde hair was shellacked into a perfect, immovable helmet. When Zoe presented her boarding pass, Brenda's eyes flicked from the paper to Zoe's face, then back again. The smile she'd given the man in the tailored suit ahead of Zoe vanished, replaced by a thin, tight line. "Just one moment, dear," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine condescension that felt sharper than any insult. She took the pass and ran her thumb over the seat number 2A, as if trying to physically wipe it away. "There might be a mistake. Let me just check my manifest." From behind Zoe, a woman's impatient sigh cut through the air. "Is there a problem? Some of us have connections to make." Zoe turned slightly. The voice belonged to a woman in her late 40s, draped in a cream-colored cashmere shawl. Her name, Zoe would soon learn, was Catherine Davenport, a well-known, notoriously aggressive venture capitalist from Silicon Valley. Her eyes, cold and assessing, swept over Zoe's comfortable travel attire, a stylish NASA hoodie, clean black joggers, and pristine sneakers, and dismissed her entirely. "I'm sure it won't be long," Zoe said, her voice quiet but steady. Brenda returned her expression, a mixture of frustration and suspicion. "The manifest says 2A is you, Zoe Washington." She said the name as if it were an alias. "Funny. This seat is usually reserved for our executive flyers. The ticket was booked by the Sterling Foundation," Zoe explained, calmly refusing to let her own frustration show. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "The Sterling Foundation," she repeated, slowly tasting the words. She handed the boarding pass back with a sigh of theatrical resignation. "Well, down the aisle on your left. Try not to block the way." Zoe's cheeks burned. Every eye in the cabin seemed to be on her. She walked down the aisle, her backpack feeling 10 times its normal weight. Seat 2A was a beautiful window seat, a spacious pot of leather and polished chrome. In the adjacent aisle seat 2B sat Catherine Davenport, who was already snapping open her laptop, creating a physical and emotional barrier between them. She didn't even glance up as Zoe stowed her bag and settled in. An invisible wall had been erected around Zoe. She was in the seat, but she wasn't a part of the club. As the other passengers settled, men in suits discussing mergers, women with designer bags sipping pre-departure champagne, Zoe was left in a bubble of silence. Another flight attendant, younger and visibly nervous under Brenda's watchful eye, offered drinks to everyone. She served the man in 1A, then Catherine Davenport, then walked right past Zoe to serve the passengers in row 3. It was so blatant, so deliberate, it felt like a slap. Zoe waited, thinking perhaps the attendant would circle back. She didn't. 10 minutes passed. The cabin door was about to be closed. Zoe politely pressed the call button. Brenda herself appeared, her posture stiff with annoyance. "Yes, I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I was missed during the beverage service," Zoe said. Brenda's eyes scanned Zoe's empty console table. "The pre-departure service is a courtesy," she said, emphasizing the word. "We're preparing for takeoff now. We're just too busy. I'll get you something once we're in the air." She turned and walked away before Zoe could respond, the dismissal echoing in the quiet cabin. Catherine Davenport let out a small, almost inaudible scoff. She adjusted her cashmere shawl, a tiny, self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. As the plane began its powerful taxi toward the runway, Zoe stared out the window at the sprawling Atlanta tarmac. She felt a profound sense of loneliness. She had earned her place here. Her mind, her work, her passion had put her in this seat. But in the eyes of the people around her, she was an intruder, a problem, an error in the system. The plane lifted off the ground, ascending into the vast, unforgiving sky, and Zoe felt herself sinking. The flight to Los Angeles would be 5 hours long. It was already promising to be an eternity. The initial ascent was smooth, the Boeing 737 cutting through the clouds with an effortless grace that Zoe, as an aspiring aerospace engineer, deeply admired. She could almost feel the physics of it, the lift, the thrust, the delicate balance of forces that allowed this metal behemoth to fly. It was a world of logic, of numbers, of elegant solutions. The world inside the cabin, however, operated on a different, uglier set of principles. Once they reached cruising altitude, the performance began. Brenda orchestrated the first-ass service like a seasoned conductor, leading a symphony of privilege. Hot towels were distributed with a flourish. Menus bound in soft leather were presented. Personalized greetings were exchanged with passengers she clearly knew by name. "Mr. Albright, your usual Macallan 18 before dinner. Mrs. Davenport, we have that Chilean sea base you enjoyed so much on your flight to London." When Brenda reached Zoe's row, she addressed only Catherine. She physically angled her body away from Zoe, creating an exclusionary triangle between herself, Catherine, and the aisle. She spoke in a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing state secrets. Zoe could hear fragments. "Absolutely. The chef has outdone himself." But the message was clear. You are not part of this conversation. After taking Catherine's order, Brenda finally turned to Zoe. The warmth in her voice evaporated, leaving a professional chill. She didn't offer the menu. "And for you?" she asked, her pen hovering over her notepad. "May I see a menu, please?" Zoe asked. Brenda's eye twitched with impatience. "Just tell me what you want, chicken or fish." The question was flat dismissive, the kind of choice offered in the back of the plane, not the front. "I'd just like to see what the options are." Zoe insisted, her politeness a shield. With an exasperated sigh, Brenda retrieved a menu and thrust it into Zoe's hand without another word. Zoe quickly scanned the gourmet descriptions, her appetite having long since vanished, replaced by a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She chose the risotto. "The risotto," she said. Brenda scribbled it down. "And for your drink, just a sparkling water, please." An hour later, the meal service was in full swing. The clinking of real silverware against porcelain filled the cabin. The man in 1A was enjoying his steak. Catherine Davenport was delicately flaking her sea bass. Everyone around Zoe was eating. Her console table remained bare. She watched as Brenda and the other flight attendant moved with practiced efficiency, refilling wine glasses, offering bread baskets, laughing at a passenger's joke. They moved around her as if she were a ghost, an empty seat. It was no longer a simple oversight. It was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty. It was a power play designed to make her feel so uncomfortable, so unwelcome, that she would shrink into herself and disappear. Zoe refused to give them the satisfaction. She would not cry. She would not make a scene. She pulled her laptop from her backpack, the familiar weight of it a comfort. She opened the file containing her winglet design, the complex 3D rendering of her creation. Filling the screen. The graceful curves and precise angles were her territory. Here she was in control. Here she was a genius. Catherine Davenport, finished with her meal, glanced over. Her eyes narrowed at the complex schematics on Zoe's screen. She leaned over, her voice a sharp whisper. "What is that? Some kind of video game?" Zoe was taken aback by the directness of the condescension. She turned to face the older woman. "No, Mom. It's a CAD model for an aerodynamic component." Catherine raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. A component for what? A toy airplane? She let out a short, derisive laugh. The anger that Zoe had been suppressing began to simmer. "It's a design for a retrofittable winglet for commercial airliners. It won the Isabel Sterling Memorial Scholarship." The name hung in the air. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Catherine's face. She knew the name Sterling. Everyone in the world of high finance and industry did, but the cognitive dissonance was too great. The girl in the NASA hoodie in front of her couldn't possibly be connected to that world. "The Sterling Scholarship," Catherine repeated, testing the sound of it. "That's very ambitious." The compliment was coated in disbelief. She turned away, effectively ending the conversation, but Zoe could see the gears turning in her head. Just then, Brenda arrived to clear Catherine's plate. She saw the laptop. "Miss," Brenda said, her voice sharp, "I'm going to have to ask you to put that away now. The meal service is still in progress, and the light from your screen could be disturbing to other passengers." Zoe looked around. At least 3 other passengers had their laptops open. The man in 1A was reading the Wall Street Journal on a glowing tablet. The rule was being applied only to her. "The other passengers," Zoe began. "The other passengers are not my concern right now. You are," Brenda snapped. "Put it away now." The public admonishment was the final straw. A wave of heat washed over Zoe's face. She felt the star of the other passengers. It was one thing to be ignored, but it was another to be publicly disciplined for a crime she wasn't committing. Humiliation coiled in her stomach. Slowly, deliberately, she saved her file, closed the laptop, and slid it back into her backpack. She leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the endless expanse of blue. They were winning. They were making her feel small. They were making her disappear. But the flight wasn't over. And in the quiet, forgotten corner of the very front of the plane, in the private crew rest area that doubled as an office, a man had just finished a series of important calls and was about to walk back into a situation he never could have imagined. The cabin lights had been dimmed for the long stretch of the flight over the Rockies. A quiet hum settled over the first-class passengers, the gentle rustle of a newspaper, the soft tap of keys on a laptop, the murmur of a low conversation. For Zoe, the silence was heavy, thick, with the residue of her public shaming. She hadn't received her meal. Her call button, which she had pressed once more, remained unanswered. It was clear the message had been sent. You will get nothing. The alliance against her, fronted by Brenda and tacitly supported by Catherine Davenport, had solidified. They fed off each other's arrogance. Every time Brenda passed the row, she would pause to offer Catherine another coffee, a warm cookie, or a simple foreign pleasantry. Each interaction was a performance for Zoe's benefit, a small twist of the knife. "Mrs. Davenport, can I get you anything at all?" Another blanket. "Perhaps an eye mask?" "Oh, you're a dear, Brenda." "Thank you. Everything is perfect." Catherine would reply, her voice loud enough for Zoe to hear clearly. Zoe tried to retreat into her own world. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, reciting the key equations of her project in her mind. It was a centering technique, a way to remind herself of who she was beyond this leather-lined prison. The coefficient of lift is a function of the angle of attack. Reynolds' number dictates the transition from laminina to turbulent flow. Her concentration was shattered by a sudden sharp jab to her side. Her eyes flew open. It was Catherine jabbing a pointed finger toward her. "Your headphones." Catherine hissed, her face a mask of fury. "I can hear them. It's completely unacceptable." Zoe was bewildered. She wasn't wearing headphones. Her earbuds were coiled neatly in her pocket. I'm not listening to anything," she stammered. "Don't lie to me." Catherine snapped, her voice rising in pitch and volume, attracting attention from the surrounding seats. "I can hear that incessant thump, thump, thump of your music right through the seat. Have you no consideration?" An older gentleman across the aisle, a kind-faced man named Mr. Harrison, who had been quietly observing the situation, leaned over. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I don't hear a thing. The young lady isn't wearing any headphones." Catherine whirled on him. "You mind your own business. I know what I hear." She jabbed the call button with a furious intensity. Brenda was there in seconds, drawn to the conflict like a moth to a flame. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Davenport?" Brenda asked, her voice syrupy with concern, though her eyes were already fixed on Zoe with an undisguised accusation. "This girl," Catherine spat the word out, "is blasting her music. I've asked her to turn it down, and she's lying about it. I cannot be expected to tolerate this lack of decorum." Brenda didn't ask Zoe for her side of the story. She didn't look for headphones. She simply accepted Catherine's testimony as gospel. She loomed over Zoe's seat, her presence oppressive. "I warned you about being a disturbance," Brenda said, her voice low and menacing. "This is a premium cabin with certain standards of conduct. If I receive one more complaint, I will have the captain radio ahead and you will be met by security upon landing in Los Angeles. Do you understand me?" The threat hung in the air, cold and terrifying. Security for what? For a crime she hadn't even committed. The injustice was so profound, so overwhelming, that Zoe felt a tremor run through her, tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and sharp, but she fought them back with every ounce of her will. She would not let them see her break. She swallowed hard, her voice coming out as a strained whisper. "I understand." "Good." Brenda said, a triumphant gleam in her eye. She turned back to Catherine with a reassuring smile. "It's been handled, Mrs. Davenport. I am so sorry you were disturbed." Catherine sniffed, sinking back into her seat with the air of a wronged queen whose loyal guard had just vanquished a peasant. The scene was over. The verdict delivered. Zoe was guilty. Mr. Harrison across the aisle shook his head slowly, a look of profound disgust on his face. He caught Zoe's eye and gave her a small, sympathetic nod, a silent acknowledgement of the far he had just witnessed. It was a tiny gesture, but in that moment it felt like a lifeline. It was proof that she wasn't crazy, that the cruelty she was experiencing was real. Zoe leaned her forehead against the window again. The sun was beginning to set, painting the clouds in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The beauty of the scene outside was a stark, painful contrast to the ugliness within the cabin. The threat of security meeting her in LA echoed in her mind. Her trip, her reward, her future, it all felt threatened by the petty tyranny of these two women. She felt utterly alone, suspended 37,000 FT in the air, with no one to turn to. What she didn't know was that the balance of power on Flight 715 was about to shift in the most dramatic and unexpected way imaginable. The man who had founded the very scholarship that put her on this plane was about to make his entrance. For the first 3 hours of the flight, the man in seat 1A had been a quiet, almost forgettable presence. He was in his late 60s, with a man of silver hair and a face etched with the lines of both stress and laughter. He wore a simple dark grey sweater over a collared shirt, understated, elegant and anonymous. He'd taken a glass of water before takeoff, declined a meal, in favour of continuing his work on a thick binder of documents, and had spoken to no one. To Brenda, he was just another wealthy passenger who preferred privacy. She had afforded it to him without a second thought. His name was Richard Sterling. He was the founder and CEO of Apex Air. He was also the founder of the Isabel Sterling Memorial Scholarship, named for his late wife, a brilliant aerospace engineer who had passed away 5 years prior. This flight was not just a routine business trip for him. He was personally flying to the Aero Innovate Dynamics Symposium to present the very first award to the young prodigy who had won it. He had seen her photo read her submission a dozen times and was immensely looking forward to meeting the girl with the brilliant mind, Zoe Washington. He had no idea she was sitting just a few rows behind him, enduring a silent torture at the hands of his own senior staff. His work was finally done. He closed his binder, stretched his long legs, and decided to get a coffee from the galley. As he stood, his commanding but gentle presence seemed to subtly alter the gravity in the cabin. The younger flight attendant saw him rise and immediately rushed over. "Mr. Sterling, can I get you something?" she asked, her voice laced with a nervous energy she hadn't shown before. "Just a black coffee." "Thank you, Maria," he said, his voice a calm, deep baritone. He knew the names of most of his senior crew. He believed in the personal touch. He decided to stretch his legs with a slow walk down the aisle and back while she prepared it. As he ambled down the cabin, he offered quiet nods to the other passengers. His gaze was observant, always assessing the state of his airline, the comfort of his customers. He noted the satisfied look on Mr. Albright's face as he sipped his scotch and the way Catherine Davenport was engrossed in her work. The picture of a contented premium flyer. Then his eyes fell on seat 2A. On the young black woman staring out the window, her posture rigid with attention that seemed to radiate off her in waves. There was something familiar about her profile, a spark of recognition. He paused, his brow furrowing. Could it be, at that exact moment, Brenda was making another pass through the cabin, collecting trash before the final descent began? She saw Richard Sterling standing in the aisle, looking at Zoe, and her blood ran cold. This was not part of the plan. The CEO was meant to stay in his seat anonymous and oblivious. She hurried over, a brittle smile plastered on her face. "Mr. Sterling, is everything all right? Can I assist you with something?" Her voice was loud, an attempt to distract him, to pull his attention away from the girl in 2A. Richard didn't look at Brenda. His eyes remained fixed on Zoe, who, feeling the sudden shift in the atmosphere and the figures standing beside her, turned her head away from the window. Her eyes met Richard Sterling's. In his, she saw a flicker of confusion, then dawning recognition. In hers, he saw a deep, weary sadness that looked utterly out of place on the face of a triumphant 17-year-old. "Zoe," he said, his voice soft with disbelief. "Zoe Washington." The cabin, already quiet, fell utterly silent. Every head turned. Catherine Davenport looked up from her laptop, her expression one of pure shock. Brenda's fake smile froze, then began to crumble. Zoe's mind raced. How did this man know her name? She scanned his face, searching her memory. She'd seen it before, in the brochure for the scholarship on the Foundation's website. The silver hair, the kind eyes, it was him. Mr. Sterling. She whispered, her voice barely audible. Brenda looked back and forth between them, her face paling to a ghostly white. The name Sterling from Zoe's ticket, which he had dismissed as a coincidence or a lie, now slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. The Sterling Foundation. Richard Sterling. The connection was suddenly horrifyingly clear. Richard's face, which had lit up with the joy of recognition, now clouded over with concern. He saw the untouched space where her meal should have been. He saw the tear tracks she thought she had hidden. He saw the oppressive posture of his most senior flight attendant looming over her. He looked at Brenda, then at Catherine Davenport, and then back at the brilliant, heartbroken young woman in seat 2A. And in that moment, Richard Sterling, the powerful CEO of a multi-billion-dollar airline, understood that something on his flagship flight had gone terribly, terribly wrong. The silence in the cabin was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Brenda looked as if she had seen a ghost. Catherine Davenport's mouth was slightly agape, her usual mask of haughty confidence shattered. For them, the world had just turned upside down. Richard Sterling ignored them both. His focus was entirely on Zoe. He crouched down in the aisle, bringing himself to her eye level, a gesture of respect that stood in stark contrast to the hours of dismissiveness she had endured. "I am so incredibly sorry." he said, his voice filled with a genuine warmth and sincerity that reached right into the coldest corners of Zoe's heart. I was going to surprise you at the symposium, but I suppose the surprise is on me. I had no idea we'd be on the same flight. I should have checked. He reached out and gently took her hand. My name is Richard Sterling. My late wife, Isabel, would have been so proud of you. What you've accomplished. It's a work of genius, Zoe. Pure genius. Tears that Zoe had refused to shed in the face of cruelty now welled up in response to kindness. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Richard saw it and his expression hardened. He stood up his full height, seeming to dominate the cabin. He turned his gaze first to Brenda, and the temperature in the aisle dropped by 20 degrees. Brenda, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Miss Washington has been my guest on this flight. I trust she has received the exemplary service for which Apex Air is known. The question was a trap, and they both knew it. Brenda's mind raced, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. She opened her mouth, but only a strangled squeak came out. She looked desperately at Catherine for support, but the venture capitalist was staring at her laptop, pretending to be invisible, her face flushed with a deep mottled red. Mr. Harrison, the gentleman from across the aisle, chose that moment to speak. Mr. Sterling, he said, his voice clear and firm, my name is Robert Harrison, and I have to tell you the service Emma Washington received was anything but exemplary. It was disgraceful. Richard's gaze shifted to Mr. Harrison, then back to Brenda. Is that so? Mr. Harrison continued, emboldened. She was ignored during beverage service. She was denied her meal. She was publicly and falsely accused of being a disturbance by that woman there, he said, nodding his head toward a mortified Catherine. And your flight attendant threatened to have her met by security upon landing. I witnessed all of it. It was a disgusting display of prejudice. Each word was a nail in Brenda's professional coffin. Richard's face became a stony mask of controlled fury. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The sheer weight of his authority was crushing. Brenda, he said, his voice now like ice, go to the galley. Maria will handle the cabin for the remainder of the flight. Do not speak to any more passengers. You and I will have a conversation once we are on the ground. A very, very thorough conversation. Brenda, her face ashen, nodded meekly and practically fled down the aisle. Richard then turned his attention to Catherine Davenport. She refused to meet his gaze, her eyes glued to her screen. Mrs. Davenport, he said. Catherine flinched, forced to look up. I know who you are. We have several mutual acquaintances in the venture capital world. I'm sure they would be very interested to hear about your standards of decorum. The implied threat was unmistakable. In her world, reputation was everything. A word from a man like Richard Sterling could poison wells of funding and destroy partnerships. The color drained from her face. For the first time in what was likely a very long time, Catherine Davenport was speechless. Finally, Richard turned back to Zoe. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by that same paternal warmth. He saw the laptop in her seatback pocket. Is that your design? He asked. Zoe nodded, finding her voice. Yes, sir. May I? He asked. She handed it to him. He opened it and his eyes lit up as he saw the complex, beautiful rendering. He whistled softly. Incredible. Isabel would have loved this. She always said the future of aviation was in elegance and efficiency, not just brute force. He looked back at Zoe, his eyes shining with pride. Zoe, you represent everything my wife believed in. You are the future. And then in the middle of the first-class cabin in front of everyone, the CEO of Apex Air, Richard Sterling, leaned down and wrapped his arms around the 17-year-old girl. He gave her a hug, not a polite corporate embrace, but a real, heartfelt hug. It was a hug of apology, of validation, of mentorship, and of profound respect. Welcome to the family, Zoe, he whispered. I am so sorry for your welcome. As Zoe hugged him back, she finally let the tension of the last few hours wash away. She felt safe. She felt seen. And she knew with absolute certainty that the karma for Brenda and Catherine Davenport was just beginning its descent. It was going to be a very hard landing. The moment the wheels of Flight 715 touched down at LAX, a new reality set in. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the first-class cabin had been demolished and rebuilt in the flight's final hour. The new queen was Zoe Washington, and her protector was the king of the entire airline. Richard Sterling did not let Zoe out of his sight. While the other passengers were gathering their belongings, he spoke quietly with Maria, the junior flight attendant, taking her name and commending her for her professionalism under difficult circumstances. He then turned to Zoe. "My driver is waiting," he said. "He will take both of us to our hotels." No arguments. His tone was kind but firm. He personally retrieved Zoe's backpack from the overhead bin and handed it to her as if it were precious cargo. As they prepared to deplane, Catherine Davenport made her move. She stood up, her face a carefully arranged mask of contrition. She blocked the aisle, forcing Richard and Zoe to stop. Richard, she began using his first name in a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of familiarity and status. "Mr. Sterling, I cannot apologize enough. I was stressed, tired from a long week. I completely misread the situation. It was unforgivable." Richard looked at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't respond for a long moment, letting her hang in the uncomfortable silence. "The thing about character, Catherine," he finally said, his voice cool and clipped, "is that it isn't defined by how you act when you're fresh and rested. It's defined by how you act when you're tired and stressed. You showed us exactly who you are. Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Washington has a very important event to get to." He gently guided Zoe around her. Leaving Catherine standing alone in the aisle, her apology rejected her status, meaningless. She had never been dismissed so thoroughly in her life. They were the first to step off the plane. At the end of the jet bridge, a stone-faced Apex Airgate agent was waiting with Brenda. Brenda's helmet of hair was no longer perfect. A few strands had come loose, and her eyes were red-rimmed and panicked. "Brenda, I want your ID badge and your wings." Richard said, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "You are on administrative leave effective immediately. Do not come to work tomorrow. You will be contacted by Human Resources to schedule a formal hearing, and I suggest you bring your union representative." Brenda fumbled with the pin on her uniform, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unzip it. She handed her credentials over the plastic ID and metal wings that represented her entire 30-year career. She refused to look at Zoe, her gaze fixed on a point of utter despair on the floor. Richard then turned to the gate agent. "Please escort Miss Miller to a private office and arrange for a taxi to take her home. She is not to access any crew areas." "Yes, Mr. Sterling." The agent replied, her expression a mix of awe and fear. As Zoe and Richard walked away, she could hear the first sob escape from Brenda, a raw, broken sound that echoed down the sterile airport corridor. Their path to the baggage claim was cleared by an airline representative. Richard's driver, a man named Frank, was waiting just outside the doors with a sign that read "Sterling." He greeted Richard warmly and then turned to Zoe with a kind smile. "And you must be Ms. Washington. It is an honor," Frank said, taking her backpack. As they settled into the plush leather seats of a black Lincoln Navigator, Zoe finally allowed herself to process everything. "Mr. Sterling, you didn't have to do all that." Richard turned to her, his face serious. "Zoe Apex Air is more than a company to me. It is a legacy. What happened to you today? It's a cancer. My wife, Isabel, faced that kind of dismissive prejudice her entire career. People constantly underestimated her because she was a woman in a man's field. She fought every day to be seen for her intellect, not her gender. The foundation this scholarship, it's meant to build a world where brilliant minds like yours are judged only by the quality of their work. What Brenda and Mrs. Davenport did was a betrayal of everything Isabel stood for, and I will not tolerate it in my company or in my presence. This is only the beginning." Zoe was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of his words. He wasn't just defending a passenger. He was defending his wife's memory. "Thank you," she whispered. During the drive, Richard was on his phone. He wasn't shouting. His voice was calm, almost placid, but the words he used were surgical. "Sarah, it's Richard. I need you to open a full top-down investigation into the conduct of senior flight attendant Brenda Miller. Yes, Flight 715 today. I want her entire service record pulled, every complaint, every commendation. I want interviews conducted with every member of her crew past and present. I have a witness, a Mr. Robert Harrison, in seat 3C. Get his contact information from the manifest and treat him like gold. I want this handled by the book, but I want it handled swiftly. Thank you." His next call was shorter. "The implications far wider. Mark, it's Richard Sterling. I'm fine, thank you. Listen, I was on a flight with one of your portfolio company's key investors, Catherine Davenport of Davenport Capital. Let's just say I found her behaviour to be utterly unprofessional and frankly bigoted. You know me, Mark. I don't say that lightly. No need for details. I just thought you should know who you're in business with. Reputation is a funny thing, isn't it? It takes a lifetime to build and 5 minutes on an airplane to destroy. Talk soon." He hung up. He didn't need to say more. He had just planted a seed of doubt, a toxic piece of information, right in the heart of Catherine Davenport's professional network. Mark would tell 2 people, and they would each tell 2 more. The unravelling had begun. By the time they dropped Zoe at her 5-star hotel, a suite personally arranged by Richard, she understood that she had witnessed more than just an airline CEO correcting a service error. She had witnessed a masterclass in the wielding of power and influence. The karma that was coming wasn't just a matter of losing a job or a business deal. It was going to be a complete and systematic dismantling of the worlds Brenda and Catherine had built on foundations of arrogance and prejudice. In the weeks and months that followed Flight 715, the consequences were not a single explosive event, but a slow, relentless, and systematic dismantling of the lives Brenda and Catherine had built. It was a lesson in the physics of karma, where every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and the momentum of their cruelty returned to them with crushing force. For Zoe, that same law of physics supplied, but in reverse. The grace and resilience she had shown created a powerful upward lift that propelled her into a future beyond her wildest dreams. For Brenda, the fall was a study in professional annihilation. Her administrative leave lasted exactly 72 hours. On a grim, overcast Tuesday morning, she found herself in a sterile, windowless conference room at Apex Air's corporate headquarters near Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Across the polished mahogany table sat a senior HR executive named Sarah, a humorless company lawyer, and her own union representative, a wearial-looking man named Dawn. Brenda had walked in expecting a fight. She had spent the last 3 days rehearsing her defense, painting herself as the victim of a misunderstanding, a senior employee simply trying to maintain order against a difficult passenger. She believed her 30 years of service would act as an impenetrable shield. She was wrong. Sarah began the meeting by sliding a thick bound folder across the table. "Brenda," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "This is the summary of our investigation into the events of Flight 715. We have a signed, notarized statement from passenger Robert Harrison in seat 3C detailing your repeated and targeted harassment of Ms. Washington." She slid a second document over. "We have a statement from flight attendant Maria Rossi, who corroborates Mr. Harrison's account and has testified under oath to a pattern of discriminatory behaviour you have exhibited for years, creating a hostile work environment for junior crew members." Another folder. And finally, we have the primary witness account from our CEO, Mr. Richard Sterling. Sarah paused, letting the weight of that name settle in the room. "He describes your conduct as a profound and sickening betrayal of every value Apex Air stands for." Brenda's union rep Dawn, who had been stoically silent, picked up the folder and began to read. His face, already grim, seemed to age 10 years in 10 minutes. He read about the denied meal, the false accusations, the threat to call security on the personal guest of the company's CEO, the winner of a scholarship founded by that same CEO. He closed the folder with a soft thud. "Brenda," he said, his voice heavy with resignation, "there's nothing I can do here. They have you on multiple witnessed code of conduct violations, including discrimination and passenger endangerment through intimidation. If we fight this, they will not only win, but they will make this public in the proceedings. You need to take the deal." The deal was a forced resignation in lie of termination with a meagre severance package that was contingent on her signing an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Her entire identity, meticulously crafted over 3 decades, was erased in the signing of a pen. She was no longer senior flight attendant Brenda Miller. She was just Brenda Miller, unemployed. The professional execution was followed by a public one. A passenger on the flight, a tech influencer with 500,000 followers on X, had live tweeted the entire drama from Zoe being ignored to the CEO's dramatic intervention. The thread went globally viral. Though he hadn't used Brenda's name, amateur internet sleuths using flight details and other passenger accounts identified her within a day. Her name became shorthand for prejudice. Aviation blogs wrote scathing editorials. Her photo was everywhere. She applied to every other major airline, Delta, United American. Her applications were met with stony silence or polite immediate rejections. She was blacklisted and untouchable. Her savings dwindled. The comfortable life her seniority had afforded her began to crumble. She sold her house and moved into a small, cramped apartment. The final bitterest irony came 6 months later. Broke and desperate, she took the only job she could get, a night shift cashier at a 24-hour superstore. There, under the harsh fluorescent lights, she spent her nights scanning items for tired, irritable customers. She was the one now being ignored, treated with impatience, her humanity reduced to the function she performed. One night, a young woman not much older than Zoe snapped at her for being too slow. "Can you hurry up? Some of us have places to be." In that moment, Brenda felt the full, crushing weight of her own past actions. It wasn't remorse she felt, not yet, but the hollow, aching echo of the same dismissiveness she had so freely dispensed. She was now on the other side of the counter, invisible. For Catherine Davenport, the retribution was quieter, but cut deeper. She was a predator in the jungle of venture capital, and Richard Sterling had just painted her with a scent that marked her as weak. His call to market Andreas Horowitz was the beginning. The story of her unprofessional and bigoted behavior spread not like wildfire, but like a poison gas seeping invisibly through the closed networks of Silicon Valley. It started with a cancelled lunch. Then, a promising AI startup she was courting suddenly went with another lower offer from a rival firm. The founder, a brilliant black woman from Stanford, explained in a curt email that they were seeking a partnership with more aligned values. Catherine, ever the fighter, tried to go on the offensive. She called her partners at Davenport Capital together, ready to dismiss the incident as a minor misunderstanding blown out of proportion. She walked into the boardroom to find not allies, but a tribunal. Her senior partner, a man named George, didn't mince words. "Catherine, we've lost 3 term sheets this month. The word is out. Nobody wants to take our money if it means taking a meeting with you. The brand is toxic." "This is ridiculous," she spat. "It was one flight, one bad day." "It was a bad day, with Richard Sterling," George retorted. "And he's not just the CEO of an airline. He sits on the boards of 3 of the biggest tech companies in the world. His wife's memorial scholarship is a passion project for the entire tech elite. You didn't just insult a teenage girl. You desecrated a sacred cow in front of the high priest." They showed her the numbers. The analytics on their firm's mentions online had turned catastrophically negative. An article was being researched by a top journalist at the Information about a Culture Crisis at Davenport Capital. They gave her the choice: resign, walk away with her vested earnings and fade away, or be voted out, stripped of her shares and publicly disgraced. Her ambition, the very engine of her being, had no choice but to surrender. Her resignation was a quiet affair, a sterile press release citing a desire to pursue new opportunities. But in her world, everyone knew the truth. The social exile was absolute. The invitations to the exclusive tech summits and the Napa Valley charity auctions stopped arriving. She saw her former partners and friends posting pictures from events she wasn't invited to. Her place at the table already filled by someone else. She had spent her life climbing to the top of a glittering social and professional ladder, only to be pushed off discovering on the way down that the entire structure was built not of money, but of reputation, a reputation she had incinerated at $37,000 FT. And for Zoe, the laws of gravity worked in her favor. Richard Sterling's speech at the Aero Innovate Dynamic Symposium became the stuff of legend. He didn't just give her an award, he anointed her. He told the assembled titans of the industry that Zoe Washington represented a purity of purpose and a strength of character that should serve as a moral compass for us all. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Her inbox exploded. There were internship offers from Skunk Works at Lockheed Martin and the propulsion team at SpaceX. A personal handwritten letter arrived from the chief designer of the Boeing 787, complimenting her on the elegance of her winglet schematics and inviting her for a private tour of their Everett factory. Richard's mentorship was transformative. It wasn't just phone calls. He flew her to Apex headquarters and had her sit in on a quarterly R&D budget meeting, introducing her to the board as the woman who is going to make our planes 4% more efficient one day. He connected her with the Dean of Admissions at MIT, his alma M. And her application, already stellar, was now flagged as generational talent. The story of the flight, once a source of deep pain, was reclaimed and reframed. A journalist from Forbes wrote a feature not about the incident, but about Zoe's incredible achievements using the flight as a dramatic backdrop to highlight her resilience. The article was titled, "Sky High, the Unstoppable Ascent of Zoe Washington." She wasn't the girl who was ignored. She was the girl who, even when faced with the worst kind of ignorance, never forgot who she was or what she was worth. Apex Air sent her a small, heavy package. Inside was a card made of polished aircraft-grade aluminum. Engraved on it were her name and the words, "Lifetime Platinum Global VIP." Beneath it was a personal note from Richard. "Zoe, the sky is no longer the limit. It is your workshop. Welcome home." In the end, the first-class cabin of Flight 715 became a perfect microcosm of the world. It was a space occupied by those who had their position by privilege and arrogance, and those who had earned it through merit and character. For a few agonizing hours, the former had lorded their power over the latter. But the universe, with a little help from a man who understood the value of both genius and grace, had reasserted its own unassailable physics. The heavy weights of prejudice and cruelty had come crashing to earth, while the brilliant light thing had been cleared for an unlimited ascent. Zoe's story is a powerful reminder that the seat you're in is less important than the character you bring to it. While Brenda and Catherine saw a teenager who didn't belong, Richard Sterling saw the future. A future built on brilliance, integrity, and grace. The karma that unfolded wasn't magic. It was the natural consequence of actions. The world tilted, as it always eventually does, toward justice. Brenda and Catherine didn't just lose their jobs or their status. They lost the right to wield power they had so clearly abused. Zoe, on the other hand, gained more than an award. She gained a powerful mentor and the confirmation that her worth was undeniable. If you believe that intelligence, kindness, and character should always triumph over prejudice and arrogance, then let us know by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story where justice in the end is beautifully served. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.